They said the will was lost in the fire, but I found a copy in the back of the freezer, and it didn't have their names. That was how it all started. The quiet unraveling of something I'd spent my life building, something I thought would be there, like a rock at the bottom of a river, steady and unshakable, but which had been quietly washed away beneath my feet. I'm Marianne Cross. I'm 81 years old, living alone in a small, weather-worn cottage on the edge of what used to be our family orchard. It's quiet here, mostly, save for the rustle of leaves when the wind catches them. I don't mind it. The silence is familiar, and at my age it feels comforting. But I wasn't always alone, and I wasn't always forgotten. I was once at the center of everything, or at least I believed I was. My husband, George, passed away 3 years ago. It's been a slow adjustment. People always talk about the adjustment period like it's something that happens quickly or that you get used to it. But they're wrong. There's no used to it. The absence of someone you've spent a lifetime with doesn't get smaller with time. It just becomes a part of the landscape, a patch of emptiness you learn to walk around. I wasn't prepared, though, for the suddenness of what happened afterward. At first, it seemed like a simple matter. My daughter, Carla, and her husband, Daniel, invited me to move in with them. They'd just bought a big house in a fancy neighborhood, and they were eager to have me live with them. I was glad, of course. What mother wouldn't want to be close to her daughter and son-in-law in their retirement years? The first few months were lovely. Carla made sure I had my own space, the guest cottage, she said. It was small, but it had all the essentials. A cozy chair by the window, a small kitchen where I could make my tea, and a bed just big enough to stretch out in. Everything felt manageable, as long as I didn't intrude too much. But the more I settled in, the more I realized how things had changed. They weren't exactly the same anymore. Oh, they put on a good show, both of them. I was a guest in their house, they said. But more often than not, I felt like an inconvenience, a thing they had to tolerate. It wasn't overt at first. At first, it was the little things. The way Carla would say, "Mom, you don't need to worry about that. Let us handle it." The way Daniel would pat me on the shoulder and tell me, "Don't bother with dinner tonight. We'll order in." I didn't mind at first, not really. After all, I was happy they were doing well. But over time, I began to notice the little jabs, the comments that, like rust, slowly started to eat away at the foundation of what I thought we had. Things got worse, though, when the fire happened. It was a small thing, really. A small electrical fire in the study. It wasn't even enough to destroy anything important. The insurance covered the damage to the house, and we went on as if nothing had happened. But that's where it all started, quietly, without me even noticing. Carla said the will was in the study, that it had been kept in the drawer by George's desk. She said the documents were burned, that there was no point in going through them. I didn't think much of it at the time. I trusted her. But it didn't feel right. There was something about the way she said it, something too dismissive. It didn't sit well with me. I asked her about it, but she just waved me off. "It's just a formality, Mom. Everything is fine," she said, like I was being ridiculous for even bringing it up. The thought didn't leave me, though. Not entirely. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And so, I let it go. I didn't want to be the difficult mother. I didn't want to cause a scene or create any more tension in what was supposed to be our new chapter together. I wasn't blind, though. I wasn't completely out of touch with reality. Over time, I began to notice that little things were missing from the house, little items here and there that once belonged to me. Books, family pictures, trinkets I'd kept for years. When I asked Carla about them, she'd just say, "Oh, we moved them to the attic. You don't need those things anymore, Mum. Let's focus on what's important now." The more she said it, the more I realized how much of my life, my memories, were being erased. Like I was being gently pushed out of their world, made to feel like an unnecessary guest in a house that had once been my home too. It didn't feel like home anymore, and that's when I began to question everything. I wasn't ready to face it yet, but deep down, I knew what was happening. I wasn't just being excluded from the house, I was being erased from their lives altogether. I had always been the center, the matriarch, the one who held the family together. But now, it seemed like I was just an afterthought. It's a strange thing, to go from being a pivotal part of someone's world to suddenly becoming invisible. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it didn't matter. I was old. I'd lived my life. What did I need, anyway? But the truth was, I didn't want to fade away like that. I didn't want to die as an afterthought, a footnote in someone else's life. I was still alive, after all. I still had things to say, things to do, and things that belonged to me. That was when I started to pay more attention. One night, when Carla and Daniel were out, I went into the study. I hadn't been in there since the fire, but I felt like I had to know. Something inside me told me to look. I opened the drawer where George's things had been kept. The envelope with the will was gone, just as Carla had said, but there was something else. An old folder, tucked at the back of the drawer. My heart began to race as I opened it. And there, at the very bottom, was a copy of the will, the original. It wasn't burned. It wasn't lost. And it certainly didn't have their names on it. The house, the land, everything, all of it was left to me. No one else. It was like a punch to the gut. But in a way, I wasn't surprised. The realization that I had been left with nothing but promises, that they'd been planning to take everything, came crashing over me. For days, I just stared at that will. It was the same one George had shown me all those years ago, the same one we'd signed together when we were young, thinking we had forever. But now it felt like a lifeline I wasn't sure I wanted to grab. I wasn't ready to confront Carla, not yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't be silenced any longer. They could take everything they wanted from me. But this was mine. It was mine. And I would make sure it stayed that way. The truth came to me in a moment that felt like it was suspended in time, sharp and clear. I had known it in my bones, of course. But like any woman who's been through the motions of family life, I had ignored the signs. I thought perhaps I was being too sensitive, too quick to assume the worst. But one afternoon, while Carla was out running errands and Daniel was holed up in his office doing whatever it was he did, I decided to take a walk around the property, something I hadn't done in months. I didn't have any particular reason for going outside, but the air felt heavy that day, like something was about to change, and I needed to clear my head. The house loomed behind me, its tall windows reflecting the midday sun, almost too pristine for my taste. The garden, on the other hand, had been left to its own devices. The grass was overgrown, the roses had begun to wilt from neglect, and the flower beds, once a pride of mine, were now just patches of brown earth. It seemed like everything around me was decaying, slowly but surely. The air, which once carried the smell of sweet blossoms and fresh soil, now only carried the scent of something drying up, something forgotten. As I walked along the overgrown paths, I felt my body aching from the usual signs of aging. But it wasn't the aches that weighed on me. It was the realization that this was no longer my world, no longer a place that had once been filled with laughter and the clinking of dishes, the steady hum of daily life. It was just a house now. A house that belonged to them, to Carla and Daniel, and I was nothing more than a lingering shadow, a guest. It wasn't until I returned to the house, lost in thought, that I noticed something strange. The door to the study, the one I hadn't been allowed into since the fire, was slightly ajar. A sliver of light leaked out from the crack, and I knew, even before I stepped inside, that I had to see what was behind it. I had to know. I didn't know what had pushed me, but in that moment, I could no longer ignore the gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach, the suspicion that had started to eat at me over the last few months. I could no longer wait for someone to tell me it was all fine, that nothing had changed, that I hadn't been slowly erased from their lives. I entered the study quietly, feeling a weight in the air, almost like the house itself was holding its breath. The room was colder than usual, the kind of cold you get when things have been left alone for too long. The shelves, once filled with books and family mementos, now stood bare, the space seemingly curated to be as impersonal as possible. I hadn't expected anything to have changed. In fact, I had hoped nothing had. But everything was different now. There was a sudden finality to it. The walls, the furniture, everything around me felt sterile, as if the house had been prepared for guests who wouldn't stay long. And then, as I passed the desk, something caught my eye. It was the edge of an envelope, peeking out from under a stack of papers. My heart skipped a beat. There was no mistaking it. It was familiar, like something from another life. It was the envelope I'd used to keep George's most important documents safe. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for it, though I didn't know if I was trembling from fear, excitement, or anger. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. I had to see it. I opened the envelope slowly, carefully, trying not to disturb the contents too much. Inside was the original will, the very same document I had signed years ago, the very same document that, for all intents and purposes, had been lost in the fire, according to Carla. I ran my fingers over the edges of the paper. It felt real. It felt like something that had survived, something that had been waiting for this moment. I unfolded the paper and began to read. It was exactly as I remembered. The signatures were there, neat and clear, the date marked in black ink. Everything was in order. But the difference, the thing that made my stomach churn and my mind race, was the part that had been conveniently forgotten in the aftermath of the fire. The portion that listed the distribution of George's estate was very different from what I had been led to believe. The house, the orchard, the savings, everything was mine. All of it. And not a single mention of Carla, not even in passing. Not a mention of Daniel either. It was as if they had never existed in George's eyes. It was all mine. That's when I realized what they had done. Or more accurately, what they hadn't done. They had lied. They had convinced me, slowly and carefully, that there was nothing left for me, that everything was gone, lost in the fire. They had convinced me that I no longer had a place here. They had wanted me to believe that I had no claim to anything, that my role in this family had been reduced to nothing more than a piece of furniture that no one needed anymore. But it wasn't true. The will was proof of that. And now, the truth. Like a floodgate that had been held closed for far too long, was suddenly pouring in. The anger surged through me like a hot rush of blood. I wasn't sure how to process it, how to feel, but I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't be silenced anymore. I wouldn't be dismissed. I wasn't some old relic to be tucked away in a corner and forgotten. I wasn't going to let them erase me from their lives like this. They had tried to take everything from me, but they had underestimated me. and they had underestimated the power of what I had found in the back of that freezer. For days, I just sat with that piece of paper in my hands, staring at it like I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing. It wasn't a shock, not exactly. I had always suspected something was wrong. But this was the confirmation. This was the truth I had been searching for. The truth I hadn't wanted to face but had known, deep down, was there all along. And now that I had it, I couldn't go back. I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine. I had been used. I had been lied to. And now, it was my turn to take control. It was my turn to decide what happened next. The following days were a blur. I didn't say anything to Carla or Daniel, not at first. I didn't want them to know I had found the will, not yet. I wanted to see how they would play this, how far they would go before I revealed the truth. I started to make plans, quietly, without telling anyone. I knew it wouldn't be easy. They wouldn't just hand everything over to me without a fight. But I was done being passive. I was done waiting for someone to validate my existence, my worth. I would fight for what was mine. I would take what was rightfully mine. I wasn't going to be the grandmother who was forgotten. I was going to be the one who decided what happened next. They had pushed me aside, assumed I would just fade away. But I wasn't fading. I was standing taller than I had in years, and for the first time in a long time, I felt powerful. I wasn't just some old woman waiting for death to take me. I was a woman with a plan. I was a woman who had been wronged, and I wasn't going to let that go. Not anymore. The days after I found the will felt like they passed in a haze. At first, I didn't know what to do with myself. It wasn't that I lacked direction or purpose, but rather that everything felt different now. I had been living under the illusion that I was safe, that my place in the family was secure, that what I had built with George and the life we shared could never be taken away. But that was before I found the will, before I discovered how they had manipulated me, how they had hidden the truth from me for so long. Now, nothing felt the same. The very ground beneath me seemed to shift, to become unstable in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with betrayal. I could feel it, like a cold draft that no one else could see, creeping into every corner of my life. The house, which had once been a place of comfort, felt foreign to me now. The walls, once filled with laughter and conversation, now seemed like mere barriers that kept me separated from something I couldn't quite name. There was a heaviness to everything. I'd spent the last several months avoiding confrontation, quietly accepting the subtle shifts in my relationship with Carla and Daniel, telling myself it was all just part of aging, that they were busy with their own lives, that I was no longer the center of attention. But all that changed the day I found the will. The truth had set off a chain reaction that I wasn't ready for, and yet I had no choice but to face it. I had no choice but to confront them. And yet, every time I thought about what I would say, about the words that would finally break the silence, a strange fear gripped me. What if they denied it? What if they twisted the facts and made it all seem like I was the one at fault? What if they just brushed it aside and told me to let it go, like they had done before? The fear wasn't just about being wronged. It was about losing control, about being dismissed yet again. I wasn't ready to confront them directly. No, that would come later. Instead, I began to notice small changes in my own behavior. I began to withdraw, to retreat into myself more than I ever had before. I stopped calling Carla. I stopped responding to her texts right away. I spent more time alone in my cottage, thinking, processing, but always second-guessing my decisions. Every day felt like an emotional minefield. One wrong step, and I could lose everything. And then, one afternoon, the phone rang. It was Carla. The sound of her voice sent a jolt of tension through me, like a snap in the air right before a storm. "Mum, we need to talk," she said, her tone sharp, the kind of tone I'd only ever heard when something was wrong. "I don't know what you think is going on, but this whole thing is ridiculous." I could hear Daniel in the background, his voice muffled. But he was there, always present when Carla needed him to be. I didn't answer immediately, didn't give her the satisfaction of a quick reply. I knew what she was trying to do. She was trying to control the narrative, trying to make me feel like I was the one who had done something wrong. "Are you there, Mom?" Carla's voice snapped me back. "I don't understand what you're doing, but it's making everyone uncomfortable. Daniel and I have talked about this, and we're both really concerned." I took a slow breath before answering. "What are you concerned about, Carla?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even, trying not to let the anger slip through. "You know what I'm talking about. This whole situation. You're making it worse than it needs to be. We're just trying to help you." I could feel the weight of her words, the insincerity that lay beneath them, the way she had always positioned herself as the savior, the one who had all the answers. It was all too familiar, too practiced, the same old pattern, the same old dance. They'd always been in control, and now they wanted to keep it that way. "You don't need to worry about me," I said, the words coming out before I even realized what I was saying. "I'm fine. I don't need your help." The silence that followed felt heavy, like she was trying to figure out how to respond, how to keep her hold on me. "Mum?" she said finally, her voice softening just slightly. "I'm just trying to look out for you. You know how much we love you, right?" I almost laughed. Love. It was a word I had heard so many times, but it didn't feel the same anymore. It didn't feel like it had when George was alive, when the family had gathered together, and the word meant something more than just an obligation. Now, it was just a tool, a word used to manipulate, to control. "I know, Carla," I said, my voice quiet, almost a whisper. "But love isn't about control." There was a pause, a moment of hesitation. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. She didn't know how to respond. The conversation ended soon after. Neither of us said much else. But that silence, that lingering feeling, told me everything I needed to know. They knew I had the will. They knew I had found it, and now they were trying to figure out how to handle it, how to make sure I didn't do anything they couldn't control. The next few days were tense, and Carla and Daniel grew more distant. They were still polite, still pretending like everything was normal, but I could feel the strain between us. Every glance, every conversation was laced with an undercurrent of something else. I saw it in Carla's eyes when she thought I wasn't looking, the flicker of uncertainty, the flicker of guilt. They were nervous now. They were worried, and I could feel it in the air. They hadn't expected me to fight back. They hadn't expected me to do anything but quietly fade away. But I wasn't going to fade. Not anymore. The first confrontation came a week later. Carla invited me into the house, told me she needed to talk things through again. She had been insistent this time, pushing me to have a real conversation. I walked into the living room where Daniel was sitting, looking more uncomfortable than usual. He didn't say anything. He just sat there, his posture stiff, his eyes not quite meeting mine. Carla started right away, her voice sharp and tight, the words coming out quickly, like she was trying to control the situation before I could speak. "Mom," she began, "we've been really patient with you, but this can't go on. You've been acting strange. and it's causing a lot of tension in the house. You need to let this go. This isn't something we need to fight over." Her words hit me like a slap in the face, and I could feel my fists balling up at my sides. "Fight over?" I asked, my voice cold. "What exactly are you asking me to let go of, Carla?" "The truth?" She flinched, just slightly, but I saw it. I saw the way her face hardened, the way she tried to maintain control of the situation. "We're just trying to be reasonable, Mom. You have to see that this is causing problems for all of us. We can't keep pretending everything is fine when you're acting like this." I stood up then, slowly, deliberately. My knees ached, but the anger inside me gave me strength. "I'm not pretending anymore," I said, my voice low but steady. "I'm not going to pretend that I don't know what's going on, that I don't see what you've done. This is my house. It was my house, and I'm not giving it up." Daniel finally spoke then, his voice rough, almost angry. "You need to get over it, Mom. You can't just hold on to things forever. We're trying to move forward here." His words were sharp, cruel even, and I could see how quickly he was losing patience with me. But I didn't flinch. I wasn't going to back down. "No," I said, my voice steady. "You're the one who needs to get over it. You and Carla. I'm not going anywhere." They both stared at me then, silent. And for the first time in months, I felt a rush of clarity, of power. They thought they could control me, manipulate me into submission. But I wasn't going to play their game anymore. I had the truth on my side now, and I wasn't going to let them take it from me. I didn't sleep that night, not truly. I lay on top of the covers, fully dressed, shoes still on, as if my body were poised for flight, but couldn't decide which direction to take. The house was quiet, suffocatingly so, and in that silence I finally allowed myself to admit something I had been avoiding for too long. Not just that I had been lied to, not just that I had been used, but that I had allowed it. That was the hardest part to face. It wasn't about the will anymore. It wasn't even about the house. It was about me. What I had allowed them to turn me into. A ghost that cooked when asked, babysat on schedule, and disappeared when inconvenient. A woman so hungry for scraps of affection that she hadn't noticed when love turned into something else entirely. Control, expectation, performance. And I had performed, like an old music box on a shelf, predictable, harmless, out of the way. At dawn, I got up, walked barefoot across the cottage floor, and made myself a pot of tea. Not the herbal nonsense they stocked for me in their pantry, but the strong black kind I kept hidden in the back of the cupboard, wrapped in foil to preserve its scent. As the water boiled, I looked around the kitchen and saw it clearly for the first time. This wasn't a home. It was a holding pen. A place to store me where I wouldn't disturb their curated life. A place just far enough from the main house that I wouldn't be heard or seen unless summoned. Even the furniture felt temporary, the kind of pieces you find in rental listings. Comfortable enough to keep you quiet, never comfortable enough to belong to. I sat by the window, tea steaming in my hands, and watched the sky lighten. Something inside me had shifted. Not just a flicker, not a passing anger, but a quiet, undeniable click, like a door unlocking from the inside. I wasn't going to ask for permission anymore. I wasn't going to wait to be invited to claim what was mine. That morning, I walked into town, slow but steady, my coat flapping open in the wind, and went straight to the small law office I remembered from when George and I first drew up the will. The brass plaque on the door was different, but the space was the same. I stepped inside and told the young man at the desk that I needed to speak with someone about a matter of inheritance. His eyes widened when I handed over the will. "You're sure this is the original?" he asked. "I'm sure," I said, "and I want it enforced." He nodded, businesslike, but I could see the flicker of curiosity in his face. An old woman, alone, walking in with a document that could uproot everything. And maybe it would. Maybe that was the point. By the time I left, the clouds had thickened overhead, and the wind had picked up, pulling at the hem of my dress. But I felt lighter. Not triumphant, not yet, but steady in a way I hadn't in years. The decision was made, the wheels in motion. I didn't need anyone's blessing. I just needed to act. Back at the cottage, I began sorting through my things. Not packing exactly, but preparing. Touching each item and asking myself if it served me or if it was another piece of my own erasure. I found photos tucked in drawers, pictures of George holding our daughter when she was still round-cheeked and bright-eyed, of summer picnics under the pear tree, of Christmas mornings before everything got complicated. I kept those. I threw out the rest, the gifts from Carla that came with strings, the clothes she bought me in colours she liked, not ones I ever wore by choice. The next day, I made a call to an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Joyce. We'd lost touch after George's illness took over my life, but I remembered her voice, her laugh, her stubborn refusal to be boxed in. When she answered, there was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "Marianne?" she said. "Is that really you?" I smiled into the receiver. "It's me. I need a room, just for a while. You still rent out the upstairs?" Another pause. "I do, but what the hell happened?" I hesitated. "Family," I said simply. She didn't press. "Come by. Bring cash for the week. No drama, no guests, no excuses." I laughed, the first real laugh I'd had in weeks. "Still setting the rules, I see." "Still alive, aren't I?" she said. "See you at 4." That was all. I packed one suitcase, not because I didn't have more, but because I didn't want more. I took the will. I took my mother's ring, my wedding photo, my teapot, and the green sweater George had once said made my eyes look like spring. I didn't tell Carla I was going. I didn't owe her that. Let her come looking when she needed a sitter or a signature. Let her find my empty room and wonder, just for once, what I wanted. The walk to Joyce's house was longer than I remembered. Or maybe my legs had simply forgotten what it meant to carry me towards something I chose. Her house hadn't changed much. Paint peeling, porch crooked, garden overgrown with stubborn herbs. But it was real, lived in, a place that welcomed Ware. Joyce answered the door in a flannel shirt and slippers, a cigarette dangling from her fingers. "You look like hell," she said, "and you smell like peppermint and disappointment." I stepped inside without protest. "Then I've come to the right place." The room she gave me was small, with a twin bed and a desk that leaned slightly to the left, but the window faced the morning sun, and the sheets were clean. That night, we shared tomato soup and old gossip. She didn't ask questions. She just poured us each a glass of something amber and said, "You staying long?" I shrugged. "As long as it takes." "Good," she said. "I hate empty houses." And so I stayed. I slept without interruption. I woke without waiting for someone to tell me what I was needed for. I started to walk the neighborhood in the mornings, learning the rhythms of a place where I didn't exist in anyone's expectations. I found a small cafe with a help wanted sign and, on a whim, asked if they needed morning staff. The woman behind the counter looked me up and down, took in the grey hair, the stiff posture, the sensible shoes. Can you pour coffee without spilling it? She asked. I've poured it through 2 wars and a marriage, I said. She snorted. Come in at 6 tomorrow. Trial shift. And so I began, not with a declaration, not with fireworks, but with quiet work and quiet mornings. I poured coffee. I wiped tables. I learned names and faces. The regulars liked me. I listened more than I talked. One man left a $10 tip after I remembered he liked his eggs over medium. Another woman hugged me after I complimented her scarf. It wasn't grand, this life, but it was mine. And for the first time in longer than I cared to admit, I felt like I was part of something that didn't require me to shrink to fit. I didn't answer any calls. I didn't check my messages. I left the phone in my drawer and listened, instead, to the sound of my own thoughts, which, though quieter now, were mine again. The world didn't end. Carla didn't come banging down the door. No one sent the police. They didn't even send a card. And in that silence, I found space to breathe. I had always believed that reclaiming your life had to be loud, defiant. But it didn't. Sometimes it was just the decision to leave, to walk out of the house where you were nothing more than a shadow, and find one where the light touched your skin again. I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. But I had moved, and in that movement, in that first quiet refusal, I had changed the story. It was no longer theirs to tell. It wasn't long before the first crack in my new life appeared. I had known, deep down, that this quiet escape couldn't last forever. Life, like everything else, has a rhythm, and the rhythms of my family were not ones that could be ignored indefinitely. Carla and Daniel, even though I had left without a word, were not going to let me simply fade from their lives without a fight. I knew that. They were the kind of people who couldn't let go of anything, not even their hold on me, even if that hold had been slowly suffocating. So, I waited. And in the waiting, I found something new in myself. A patience I hadn't realized I had. It was strange, how the things you think are gone can return when you least expect them. The patience I had once had for George, for the children, for life itself, how it had been squeezed out of me, drop by drop, over the years, and now it was back. It wasn't the loud, desperate patience of the past, but the quiet understanding of someone who knew that nothing good came from rushing, that some things had to happen in their own time. But even patience, I knew, had its limits. And mine, I realized one morning, was running out. The first call came 3 weeks after I'd left the house. I had been walking back from the little park down the street, the air warm with the first hints of spring. I had my hands full with groceries, a loaf of bread tucked under one arm, a bag of apples clutched in my other hand. I wasn't paying attention when I heard the phone ring inside the cottage, and I didn't rush to answer it. I knew it would be them, Carla, Daniel, or someone trying to get me to come back. I had learned how to ignore the sounds of my old life. It was only when I came inside and heard the beep of a voicemail that I finally decided to listen. It was Carla's voice, tight and controlled, but I could hear the anxiety in it, the weight of something she was trying to hide. Mum, we need to talk. I don't know what you think is going on, but this isn't what you think. Please, we've been trying to figure this out. Call me, okay? Please. That was it. No explanation, no apology, just an urgency that made my stomach twist. I could feel the pressure building, the familiar sense of being cornered. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I knew that something had changed. The silence that had followed me since I left was gone now, replaced with something heavier. They were coming for me. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally. They had finally decided to deal with what I had done. I didn't call back. Instead, I put the phone down and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the garden that was slowly coming back to life. The flowers weren't quite blooming yet, but the earth had softened under the sun. I could hear the birds singing in the trees, and for the first time since I had left, I felt something that I hadn't in a long time. Peace. They couldn't take that from me. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't take this peace away. But then came the second message. This time, it wasn't from Carla. It was from a lawyer. Mrs. Harlow, my name is Derek Sorensen. I'm representing your daughter and son-in-law regarding your recent actions. We need to speak about the will and your recent decisions to leave the family home. I would appreciate it if you would contact me at your earliest convenience. The words hit me harder than I expected. A lawyer? A professional, formal request to speak? It was like something out of a nightmare. A part of me had hoped, had clung to the hope, that they would just let me go. But I should have known better. They didn't let people go. They didn't release their hold. Carla and Daniel were not the kind of people who walked away from anything, especially not from me. And they had already shown they were willing to use whatever tools they had at their disposal to get what they wanted. The next few days were a blur. I didn't respond to the lawyer's call. I didn't respond to Carla's second message. I didn't answer anyone's calls, didn't open the door when the delivery people arrived. But the silence felt different now. It wasn't the peace of my own choosing. It was the kind of silence that preceded a storm. The weight of what was coming hung in the air, pressing down on me, suffocating me. The world outside the cottage seemed farther away than it had been. The freedom I had felt just a week ago was slipping through my fingers like water, and I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop them. Then one morning, almost exactly 1 week after the lawyer's message, there was a knock at the door. I knew it would come sooner or later. There had been no other option. I had been avoiding this, but I couldn't avoid it any longer. I opened the door, and there he stood. A man in a dark suit, a briefcase hanging at his side. His expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, in the way his eyes darted around the small cottage, taking in everything. "Mrs. Harlow," he said, his voice smooth, practiced. "Derek Sorensen. I'm here to discuss the recent legal matters regarding your estate." I said nothing, only stepped aside, motioning for him to enter. The quiet, the tension, it all felt suffocating now, like a rope slowly tightening around my chest. But I didn't move. I couldn't. I had to see this through. He sat down at the small table in the kitchen, placing the briefcase on the chair beside him. He opened it, then pulled out several sheets of paper. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. I already knew what they said. They were going to fight me for everything. They were going to drag me through the mud if that was what it took. They would do whatever they had to in order to make me bend. He looked up at me, his gaze calculating, as if waiting for some sort of response. "I understand this is a difficult situation for you, Mrs. Harlow," he began, his voice softening in an attempt to put me at ease. "But the fact remains that your daughter and son-in-law have rights to the property. They've tried to be patient with you, but it's clear that things have escalated beyond what anyone expected. We're here to resolve this matter as efficiently as possible." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell him that his words meant nothing. They didn't understand me. They didn't understand what they had taken from me. But I didn't. Instead, I stood still, my hands clenched at my sides, and listened to him lay out their demands. They wanted the house back, they wanted the land back, and they wanted it all settled without further delay. It was clear, in that moment, that they didn't think I could fight them. They thought I was too old, too tired, too resigned to do anything but accept their terms. They were wrong. I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let them take what was mine, no matter how they tried to frame it, no matter how much they tried to twist it. They were going to have to fight harder than they thought. When he left, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry either. I felt like something inside me had finally snapped into place. I had been waiting for their next move, but now I realized that I was the one who had been in control all along. They had underestimated me, just like they had underestimated the power of what I had found in the freezer. The will, the house, the life I had built. They couldn't take it from me. Not without a fight. And I wasn't about to give in. Not now. Not ever. I went to bed that night with a new resolve, a quiet determination that had been building inside me for days, but which I hadn't fully acknowledged until now. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about my dignity. It was about my right to be seen and heard. I wasn't just a mother to them. I wasn't just an old woman to be forgotten. I was Mary Ann Harlow, and I had spent my whole life building something that no one could take away. Not even them. The day the letter arrived, I had been standing by the window, watching the birds dart from tree to tree. It was a quiet morning, one of those mornings where time feels like it's stretching, giving you room to think, to breathe. I had become used to these moments of stillness, the kind of solitude that wraps itself around you, not as something oppressive, but as something familiar, something that had come to define my life since I moved into Joyce's house. For a while, it had been enough. This life, small and simple, but comfortable, unhurried. I had even found peace in the routine, something I hadn't realized I was missing before. The quiet, the absence of constant demands and expectations, had given me a clarity I hadn't had in years. But that morning, as I stood there, looking out over the small garden in Joyce's backyard, I knew that things were about to change again. I didn't know how or why, but I could feel it in the air, the same tension that had come with the arrival of the lawyer, the same tension that had followed me from the moment I had left the house. The letter was thick, bulky, a weighty thing that felt like more than just paper. I hadn't been expecting it, but when I saw the return address, the familiar name of a law firm, I knew exactly what it was. The time had come. The family was done waiting. They were going to force my hand, whether I was ready or not. I stood there for a long time, just holding the envelope, letting the weight of it sink in. It felt as though the letter contained everything: the past, the betrayal, the years of my life spent giving, and now, finally, the reckoning. It was all in that single envelope. I sat down at the kitchen table, my hands trembling as I opened it. Inside were the usual formalities, the legal jargon that had started to feel like a second language to me. But there was one sentence that stood out, one sentence that made my heart skip a beat. This letter serves as a formal request for the return of all assets under your possession, including, but not limited to, the family home, the land, and any other assets that were not part of your original inheritance. I reread the words again. Then, again, the weight of them pressing down on me, the finality of it settling in. They weren't just trying to convince me to come back, to be a part of their carefully curated life again. No, they were trying to take everything. They had made their move. They were going to fight me, legally, with every tool at their disposal. I took a deep breath. It wasn't a surprise. Not really. I had known this day was coming, but knowing it and experiencing it were two entirely different things. And yet, as I held the letter in my hands, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't fear, not this time. It wasn't anger either. It was something else, something quieter, something stronger. It was resolve. For all the years I had spent being a quiet, invisible figure in my own life, I realized that I had never truly fought for what was mine. I had let them take it all, my place in the family, my rights, my dignity. But not anymore. Not this time. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in the drawer, and stood up. There was no hesitation now. There was no room for doubt. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to give in. I wasn't going to let them take everything from me, not without a fight. I wasn't going to let them rewrite my story. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. I had spent so much of my life being silent, being the one who did what was expected of her, who sacrificed without question. But now, the silence had become unbearable. It wasn't a silence born of peace or contentment. It was a silence born of submission, of compliance, of giving up without a word. I wasn't going to let that be my legacy. I wasn't going to be the woman who let the world walk over her. Not anymore. The decision was made. There was no going back. I called Joyce, told her I needed to go to town. She didn't ask why. She knew. She always knew. There was something in her that understood without needing an explanation. "Be safe," she said, and I could hear the quiet support in her voice. I walked to the courthouse, the weight of what I was about to do settling over me with each step. It wasn't just about the house or the will. It was about reclaiming myself, reclaiming my life. I didn't owe them an explanation, and I didn't owe them any more of my time. They had used me for years, taken what they wanted, and left me with nothing but memories and expectations. But I was done with that. I wasn't going to stand there, waiting for them to decide my fate. I was going to take control. I was going to stand up for myself, for the woman I had been before everything changed, before they made me believe that I didn't matter. The courthouse was small, quiet. I stepped inside, walked to the clerk's desk, and asked to speak to a lawyer. The young woman behind the desk looked up at me, surprised by my request. "You're here alone?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded. "I need to make sure the will is enforced," I said. "And I need to make sure they can't take what's mine." Her eyes softened, but she didn't question me. She just nodded, picked up the phone, and called for someone to meet with me. It didn't take long before a lawyer came to speak with me. He was younger than I expected, his suit too new, his hands too clean, but his gaze was sharp, and I could see that he understood. "Mrs. Harlow," he said, sitting down across from me, "I understand you wish to challenge the current request for the return of the family assets." I nodded. "I don't just wish to challenge it," I said, my voice steady. "I wish to make sure that what is rightfully mine stays that way, and I'm prepared to fight for it." We spent the next several hours discussing the legal steps I would need to take, the evidence I had, and the strategies we could use to ensure that my rights were upheld. It was strange, in a way, to be sitting there, to be fighting for something so simple, a house, a piece of land. But it wasn't just about the property. It was about what that property represented, the life I had built, the dignity I had lost, and the strength I was now finding in myself. When the meeting ended, I felt a sense of clarity that had been missing for so long. The path ahead was clear. The fight wouldn't be easy, It wouldn't be quick, but it was mine to fight, and I was ready. The next few days were filled with legal paperwork, meetings, and calls from my lawyer. I didn't answer any calls from Carla or Daniel. I didn't need to hear their pleas, their threats. I knew what they wanted, and I wasn't giving it to them. They had taken enough from me. I wasn't going to let them take this, too. The hearing came quickly. The courthouse was packed, but I wasn't nervous. I had prepared for this moment, for the day when I would stand up and be counted. I didn't need to speak to anyone, didn't need to make any grand speeches. All I had to do was show up. All I had to do was be there. And when the judge's gavel came down, when the decision was made, I knew, deep down, that I had won. I had fought for myself, and I had won. The day the judge's gavel came down, I felt a strange stillness settle over me, as if the world had finally quieted, even for just a moment, to allow me to breathe. It wasn't victory I felt. Not exactly. Not in the way I had imagined it would feel, like a sudden rush of triumph or a sense of finality that would make everything else pale in comparison. No, it was something subtler, something quieter. It was the feeling of having reclaimed a part of myself that I had forgotten existed, the part that had always been there, buried beneath years of silence, of giving, of fading into the background of my own life. I had fought, not just for the house or the land or the money, but for the right to be seen, to be heard, to be someone who was more than just a name on a will or an afterthought in the lives of my family. I had fought for myself, for the woman I had once been, and for the woman I was still becoming. The hearing itself was a blur. I didn't pay much attention to the words that were being spoken, to the legal arguments and the back and forth between the lawyers. It wasn't about them. It wasn't even about the law. It was about what the law represented: justice, fairness, a chance for someone like me to reclaim what had been taken from her. The judge's decision, when it finally came, wasn't surprising. I had known, deep down, that it would go my way. The will had been clear. My rights had been clear. But knowing it and hearing it spoken out loud were two different things entirely. When the judge ruled in my favor, I didn't feel relief. Instead, I felt a profound sense of peace, as if a weight I hadn't even known I was carrying had been lifted, and for the first time in years, I could stand up straight and breathe deeply, unburdened. The news of the decision spread quickly. Carla and Daniel, predictably, were not pleased. They had expected to get everything, expected to win, expected that I would quietly give up. But instead, they had lost. It was a difficult pill for them to swallow, one they didn't take gracefully. Carla called me, her voice strained, her words sharp. She tried to make it seem as though she hadn't cared about the outcome, as though it didn't matter to her. But I could hear the anger and the hurt in her tone. The way she tried to twist the situation to make it seem like I was the one who had caused all the pain. "You don't understand what you've done, Mom," she said, her voice breaking. "This isn't just about money. It's about family." I listened, though I didn't say much. She wanted me to feel guilty. She wanted me to feel like I was the one who had done something wrong, like I was the one who had betrayed them. But I knew better now. I had spent too many years letting their manipulation dictate my actions, too many years letting them define who I was and what I was worth. I wasn't going to let it happen again. "I understand exactly what I've done, Carla," I said, my voice steady. "I've finally done something for myself. For the first time in a long time, I've done something that wasn't for you or for anyone else. This is my life, and I'm not giving it up. Not for you, not for anyone." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her struggling to find the words, to say something that would make me feel bad for standing up for myself. But I wasn't going to let her. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever again. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to fix this," she said. "I don't know how to make it right." "I'm not asking you to fix anything," I replied, my tone gentle but firm. "I'm just asking you to understand that I'm done being the one who always gives in. I'm done being the one who sacrifices. I've given enough. Now it's time for me." There was no response after that. I didn't expect there to be. I didn't need her approval, didn't need her to understand. I had already done what needed to be done, and that was enough. The days that followed were quiet, but the peace I had longed for finally began to settle in. I returned to the house, our house, the one that had been taken from me for so long, and it felt different this time. It didn't feel like the place I had once been pushed out of, the place where I had been made to feel like a burden. No, it felt like home again, in a way I hadn't felt in years. The walls, the floors, the rooms, they weren't just a part of the past anymore. They were part of me, a part of the future I was beginning to rebuild. I spent the next few weeks taking my time, making decisions slowly and carefully. There was no rush. I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. I started fixing things, small things at first. A leaky faucet, a cracked window, the overgrown garden that had been left to die. Each task felt like a small act of reclamation, each one a reminder that I was in control now, that I had the power to shape my life the way I wanted to. The house wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was mine, and that was enough. I didn't speak to Carla or Daniel again. I didn't have to. They had made their choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. I had learned, through all of this, that family wasn't just about blood or obligation. It wasn't about what people took from you or how they tried to manipulate you into giving up what was yours. Family was about respect. It was about honoring the people you loved, but also honoring yourself. And I had spent far too many years dishonoring myself, letting others define who I was. But that was over now. I moved forward. Slowly, carefully, but with a determination that had been building inside me for years. I started spending more time with Joyce, having long conversations over tea, sharing stories of our lives and our pasts. It wasn't much, but it was real. It was a kind of connection I hadn't realized I was missing, a connection that didn't come with strings or expectations, just two people who understood each other without needing to explain. As the months passed, the house became more than just a place to live. It became a symbol of what I had fought for, of what I had claimed back. It became a place where I could be myself again, where I could breathe without feeling like I was suffocating under the weight of someone else's expectations. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was mine. And as I sat in my favorite chair by the window, looking out over the garden I had brought back to life, I realized something that I hadn't fully understood before. I wasn't just living in the house. I was living in my life again. And that was more than enough.